I always check my mail after work, like a routine. That day was no different, just the usual stack of flyers, HOA notices, and a couple of bills. But one envelope stood out, a thick white one from the HOA with bold red text that read, "Immediate attention required." Right then, I knew it wouldn't be good, but I didn't expect that. I opened it right there in my driveway, still holding my keys. As I unfolded the letter, a smaller sheet slipped out, my electricity invoice. At first glance, I thought it was a typo. The total due, $5,012.39. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and read it again. $5,000 for a single billing period? I live alone in a 2,000 square foot home with solar panels. My average monthly electricity bill barely crossed $150. This wasn't just unusual, it was insane. I walked inside, sat down, and spread out the papers. The letter explained that the HOA had recently adopted a new utility cost-sharing model, supposedly to streamline community energy usage. They claimed it was more equitable and modern, whatever that meant. The language was deliberately vague, full of legal fluff and energy audit jargon. Buried in the middle was the key phrase: each resident is now responsible for a proportional share of community energy expenditures, including lighting, security systems, and shared facilities. My jaw dropped. They were charging me for powering the entire neighborhood clubhouse, including outdoor lighting, heated pools, tennis court lights, and security gates. I don't even use the clubhouse. I haven't played tennis in years. And to make it worse, some of the facilities stayed on 24/7. So they expected me, and every other homeowner, to foot the bill like we were all splitting an Airbnb. It was theft disguised as policy. At first, I thought maybe there was a mistake. I grabbed the phone and called the HOA office. After 10 minutes of elevator music, someone finally answered, Clara, the office manager. I explained the situation politely, even gave her the invoice number and date. She sounded completely unfazed, like she had gotten 20 calls just like mine. "Oh yes," she said in that condescending tone people use when they think they're smarter than you. The board approved that last month. It was discussed in a newsletter and the April meeting. I told her I never got a newsletter and couldn't attend the meeting due to work. She told me the decision was final. When I asked how exactly they calculated the share, she muttered something about square footage and usage estimates before quickly pivoting to legal policy and shutting me down with a casual, "You can file a formal dispute, but payment is due within 14 days. 14 days. For $5,000. Over something I never approved, voted on, or even had the chance to question. I hung up and stared at the bill again. My anger started building. Not the hot kind that burns out fast, but the cold, focused kind that starts in your chest and spreads slowly, methodically. I wasn't just mad about the money. I was mad about the arrogance, the entitlement, the blatant assumption that I would just pay and shut up. I called a few neighbors to see if they got the same notice. 2 of them hadn't opened their mail yet. One had and was just as furious. He said he called too, and they gave him the same speech. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a scheme, a deliberate, calculated move by the HOA board to offload their costs onto residents under the pretense of shared responsibility. I went through the last few months of HOA meeting notes online and confirmed my suspicion. Buried deep in the minutes from a sparsely attended April meeting, there it was, motion to approve community utility cost reallocation passed 4-1. Not a single mass notification. No community vote. Just 5 people in a room deciding to hike everyone's bill without warning. I was done being polite. I wasn't just going to fight it. I was going to make them regret it. But before I could get to that part, I needed to understand how the power flowed. Literally. I needed to know exactly where the clubhouse pulled its electricity from and how the HOA structured their grid access. And once I did, things would start getting very, very dark for them. After the initial shock of the $5,000 bill wore off, I started digging deeper into the justification they provided. The explanation, if you could even call it that, was buried in a pile of legalese and bureaucratic nonsense. But once I stripped it down to the essentials, the core argument from the HOA was infuriatingly simple: shared power usage. According to their letter, the community had recently undergone a shift to eco-efficient communal billing. a phrase that sounds nice on paper but is poison in practice. They claimed it was part of a new initiative to streamline energy usage across shared spaces. The clubhouse, gym, pool, tennis courts, and even the security cameras lining the streets were all being powered through a collective system now. The homeowners, they said, would share the costs based on property size and estimated use. There was a specific sentence that burned into my mind. Homeowners are expected to contribute proportionally to the energy usage of amenities which provide value to the community at large. That was their reasoning. They believed that because these facilities benefited us all, we should all pay, no matter how little or how often we actually use them. I hadn't set foot in that clubhouse in over a year. I worked full-time, took care of my yard myself, and didn't use the pool, the gym, or the fancy grilling pavilion with the decorative lights that stayed on all night. But none of that mattered to the board. Their argument wasn't about use, it was about presence. Just living there, just owning a house in the neighborhood, made me financially responsible for every single bulb, outlet, and appliance used in the communal areas. So while I carefully turned off lights at home, while I installed solar panels and energy-efficient appliances to save money, the HOA was burning electricity around the clock and handing me the bill. I want to know exactly who came up with this shared usage policy. Turns out, the board president, Greg Saunders, pitched it. He claimed it would reduce long-term costs by centralizing services and streamlining the budget. I managed to get a copy of the meeting recording where it was introduced. Greg stood there like he was announcing some genius breakthrough, talking about community unity through shared infrastructure. The other 4 board members nodded along like bobbleheads. Not once did anyone raise the issue of transparency. Not once did they suggest notifying homeowners before implementing such a drastic change. No surveys, no mailers, no town halls. They simply voted it in and buried the details in a newsletter most people never even saw. That kind of manipulation isn't just unethical, it's predatory. They knew people wouldn't pay attention to the fine print. They counted on it, and now they were banking on silence and confusion to push this scheme through. I started talking to other residents, and most of them were completely in the dark, pun intended. One neighbor, a retired couple living on a fixed income, had no idea why their bill shot up by $800 that month. Another, a single mother with 2 kids, was trying to arrange a payment plan because she couldn't afford the spike. I called the HOA again, this time demanding a breakdown of the power usage. After being transferred twice and put on hold for nearly 30 minutes, I finally got someone who forwarded me a PDF spreadsheet. It listed kilowatt hours by zone, clubhouse, pool area, gym, gate lighting, and miscellaneous operations. The numbers were staggering. The clubhouse alone used more power in a month than my entire home did in 6. That's when I noticed something even more suspicious. Some sections of the report showed meter readings registered on my property, not just for my home, but for auxiliary usage supposedly related to community services. It was vague, but it implied that part of the clubhouse or outdoor lighting grid was drawing from a source near my own land. That raised a massive red flag. I went outside with a flashlight that night and traced some of the external wiring behind my backyard. Sure enough, there was a junction box, discreetly placed, half covered by shrubs, sitting just beyond my property line. I contacted a local electrician the next day and asked him to inspect it. He confirmed my suspicion. The setup was drawing power from a shared transformer located on a plot of land technically owned by me. A small sliver I had acquired years ago through a quiet title action. The HOA never filed a utility easement for it, but they'd been using it, illegally, for years. That's when it clicked. Not only had they forced residents into a collective billing trap, but they had also been siphoning power through infrastructure they had no legal right to touch. They were stealing under the guise of policy, and they thought no one would ever question it. Once I knew the HOA was trying to pass off this outrageous $5,000 electric bill as shared usage, I became obsessed with proving just how ridiculous and possibly illegal it really was. I wasn't about to let them bury me in vague numbers and corporate doublespeak. So I did what they didn't expect a homeowner to do. I did the math. I started by collecting all of my previous electricity bills from the past year. Month by month, I compared kilowatt-hour usage costs, peak versus off-peak rates, and solar offsets. My average came to just under 1,000 kilowatt-hours per month, never exceeding $160, even during peak summer. That's with running my AC, appliances, and charging a hybrid car. And yet, suddenly I was being billed for over 30,000 kilowatt-hours in a single cycle. It wasn't just wrong. It was impossible. I highlighted the suspicious numbers on the new invoice and cross-referenced them with the spreadsheet the HOA reluctantly sent me. Their breakdown of communal usage was conveniently lumped into large, unlabeled categories: security systems, 5,900 kilowatt-hours, outdoor amenities, 9,200 kilowatt-hours, fitness center HVAC, 7,100 kilowatt-hours, and the kicker, miscellaneous utility load, 8,700 kilowatt-hours. It read more like a money laundering scheme than a utility breakdown. I wanted to be sure I wasn't missing something, so I brought in a friend of mine, Eli, who works as an electrical engineer. I showed him the numbers and asked him to estimate what a complex like ours should realistically consume for shared amenities. He ran a few back-of-the-napkin calculations and came up with a ballpark figure of 10,000 to 12,000 kilowatt-hours per month total. Not for one house, for the entire communal system. The HOA's figure of over 30,000 was triple that, and now they were splitting it across 30 homes. Even if I played along with their absurd model, the share per house should have come to about $300 to $400, maybe $600 max if someone fudged the numbers. Not $5,000. That's when Eli asked me a question I hadn't thought about yet. Where's all this power going? I realized I didn't actually know the full layout of the community's electrical infrastructure. I had assumed the HOA paid the utility company directly for the shared spaces, but if they were rerouting power through homeowners, or worse, using shared transformers tied to residential meters, then the whole operation was crooked. I spent a full weekend walking the property. Not just my own house, but the clubhouse, the tennis courts, the walking trails, the storage sheds, the pump house, even the trash compactor area. I took photos of every meter I found. Some are clearly labeled for specific zones. Others weren't labeled at all. One particular panel, bolted shut behind the clubhouse, had wires leading underground in multiple directions, and no visible utility tag. When I asked the HOA's maintenance supervisor about it, he said it was off-limits for safety reasons. That only made me more curious. I contacted the local utility company and requested a breakdown of the meters associated with my account. The report they gave me included one extra meter I didn't recognize. It was tied to a parcel adjacent to my property, a utility zone the HOA had been using to feed power into a distribution box. The same transformer the electrician had identified earlier. That meant they weren't just overcharging, they were literally routing some of their communal power through residential infrastructure, including mine. By now, I had a binder full of evidence. Past bills, the HOA's so-called energy breakdown, expert analysis, photographs, and utility documentation. But I wanted one more piece, the smoking gun that proved intent. I dug through archived HOA documents and finally found something buried in the bylaws revisions from 2 years earlier. A clause had been quietly added. The association reserves the right to restructure shared utility burdens in the interest of equitable cost distribution. No dates, no guidelines, just vague legal permission to shift costs however they pleased. That told me everything. This wasn't just a policy that went out of control. It was engineered, planned out, voted on behind closed doors, and implemented in a way that concealed where the energy was really going. They used bureaucracy as camouflage, and they assumed no one would care enough to follow the wires. But I did. I followed every meter, every cable, every clause in the contract. I did the math they hoped no one would check. And now I knew exactly how they'd done it, and exactly how I was going to respond. After all the calculations, all the meter tracing, all the quiet hours spent highlighting documents and tracking utility routes, I decided it was time to confront the HOA directly. At first, I tried going through the formal channels. I wrote a certified letter addressed to the board with all my findings, dates, figures, photos, and even the transformer data from the utility company. I gave them everything. I laid it out logically, professionally, and without threats. I told them that I had verified the improper rerouting of electricity and detailed how the billing structure didn't match real usage. I gave them 10 business days to respond. I didn't get a single reply. I followed up with an email blast to each of the 5 board members. Again, no response, except from the treasurer, who wrote back a single sentence. If you believe there's a legal issue, we suggest pursuing it through the appropriate channels. That was their playbook. Cold indifference. Hide behind procedure. Wait you out until you go away. So I went to the next HOA board meeting. I showed up early and signed up to speak. When my turn came, I calmly walked to the front, placed a printed copy of my utility report on the table, and began explaining everything I had discovered. How the energy was being rerouted, how they never obtained a utility easement, and how the billing distribution was fabricated and unsupported by any real data. I explained that I owned the parcel of land with the transformer and had legal grounds to cut off unauthorized access. Half the board looked stunned. The other half looked annoyed. They didn't ask any clarifying questions. Instead, Greg, the president, just cleared his throat and gave me that smug HOA smile everyone who's ever dealt with one knows all too well. "We appreciate your feedback," he said. "Unfortunately, this meeting is not the appropriate venue for addressing individual billing concerns. You may submit a formal grievance, and we'll review it at our discretion." I couldn't believe it. I had just laid out a blueprint for how they'd been stealing power and scamming residents, and he treated it like I was complaining about a broken sprinkler. A few other residents came up to me afterward, shocked by what I had revealed. One guy even said he'd suspected something was wrong for a while, but didn't have the time or proof to challenge it. I realized then that this wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't just about my electric bill or the transformer on my land. It was about control. The HOA operated like a private club with public consequences. They made decisions in secret, enforced them without debate, and shut down anyone who questioned them. They relied on people being too busy, too tired, or too scared to push back. I went home that night, opened up my laptop, and began drafting a detailed complaint to the State Utilities Commission. But I also knew that process would take time, months, maybe longer. And during that time, the HOA would keep charging people, keep rerouting energy through lines they didn't own, and keep pretending everything was perfectly legal. I sent a final email to the HOA board. This time, it wasn't a request. I informed them that unless the shared utility billing system was suspended within 5 days, I would be terminating all unauthorized access to the power infrastructure located on my property. I cited the exact parcel number, included the transformer ID, and attached a legal notice from my attorney stating that no easement existed and continued usage constituted trespassing and theft of services. Still no response. It was clear now. They didn't believe I would actually do it. They thought I was bluffing, that I'd cave, that I was just another angry homeowner trying to win a battle I couldn't afford to fight. They underestimated just how much I had already prepared. I reviewed the utility layout one more time. The transformer feeding the clubhouse and external lights sat just a few feet past my rear property line, technically on a flag-shaped section of land I'd acquired years ago when a developer defaulted on a small parcel. It was unnoticeable to most, just some weeds and a fence line. But legally it was mine, and the junction box on that land was the artery for half their grid. I called a licensed technician and scheduled the disconnect. He verified ownership, checked utility maps, and confirmed that I had the legal right to terminate access. No court order required. No permit needed. Just a letter of ownership and a technician with the right tools. And just like that, the countdown began. 5 days. That's what I gave them. 5 days to respond, correct their actions, and reinstate honest billing. They didn't even send a courtesy reply. The arrogance was staggering. They thought I wouldn't follow through. They thought I'd stay quiet, stay compliant, stay powerless. The morning of the 5th day, I stood by my back fence, coffee in hand, watching the technician roll in with his truck. He was calm, professional, and methodical, just like I wanted. This wasn't about theatrics or a dramatic showdown. It was about making things right, legally and decisively. I had the documents in a folder tucked under my arm. The deed to the sliver of land, the parcel number, the the letter from my attorney, and a printed map highlighting the location of the transformer they had no right to use. I led the technician through the back gate, down a small gravel path that no one in the neighborhood ever paid attention to. It was quiet out, the kind of summer morning where the sun's barely warm, birds are still chirping, and sprinklers are clicking in nearby yards. Most people were still asleep or sipping their coffee inside, completely unaware that their little kingdom was about to go dark. The technician crouched by the transformer and opened the rusted gray panel. He traced the main line, noted the secondary connection, then looked back at me for confirmation. I nodded. He made a call to the utility company's service line, verified the disconnect on record, and confirmed there were no overlapping residential dependencies on the line. All systems checked out. No legal hurdles. No possible claims of negligence. 10 minutes later, with the flip of a switch and a twist of a tool, the line feeding the HOA's communal power was shut off. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just stood there, arms crossed, watching the technician secure the box with a new lock I provided, my lock. From now on, they'd need my written permission to access that transformer. And they wouldn't get it. The effect wasn't instant, but it wasn't long either. Within the hour, the first signs of confusion started. A neighbor texted me asking if I knew why the gym's keycard system wasn't working. 10 minutes later, another one said the pool lights weren't on and the gate wouldn't open. By noon, the clubhouse AC had cut out. Then came the real chaos. The HOA office, which was housed in a wing of the clubhouse, had gone completely dark. No lights, no computers, no phone system. The security cameras went down. The decorative lights lining the main boulevard were off. Even the speaker system that blasted seasonal music near the garden entrance went silent. The silence was beautiful. By late afternoon, I saw Greg, the HOA president, standing in the middle of the front lawn, phone to his ear, pacing like a nervous politician. Two other board members stood near the clubhouse entrance, holding clipboards and looking completely out of their depth. The electrician they called showed up about an hour later. I watched him from my kitchen window. He popped open the panel, shook his head, made a few calls, and then drove off. He couldn't reconnect the power. He wasn't authorized to touch equipment on land they didn't own. That evening, the board finally tried contacting me. First came an email, polite and vaguely apologetic. They requested temporary access to restore essential services. I didn't respond. Then came a phone call, voicemail only. Then in a last-ditch attempt, Greg showed up at my door. He was dressed down, no blazer, no clipboard, just a forced smile and tired eyes. He asked if we could talk this out like neighbors. I listened, gave him the courtesy of not slamming the door in his face, but made it clear, the power stays off until the illegal billing stops. The infrastructure is rerouted off my property, and the HOA reimburses residents for the inflated energy charges. He tried to bluff, said this was bigger than me, said there were rules and procedures. I reminded him that they had ignored every rule, every policy, and every homeowner's right to transparency and fairness. And now they were paying for it, literally in sweat, complaints, and spoiled office snacks. Over the next few days, the HOA scrambled to restore order. They brought in a generator, too small to handle the full load. They had to shut down non-essential areas just to keep the access gates running. They sent out panic notices to residents, calling it an unexpected outage due to maintenance issues. But some of the homeowners already knew the truth. The story had started spreading. People were asking questions. People were angry. And while the clubhouse stayed in the dark, my lights stayed on, my bill went back to normal, and I slept like a baby. In the days that followed the power shut-off, the silence from the HOA office was deafening. No apology letters, no public meetings, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just confusion, rumors, and panic. The board was in full damage control mode, but without electricity to their own headquarters, their operations crumbled. Residents were starting to ask serious questions, and for the first time, people who had blindly trusted the HOA were starting to realize just how deep the manipulation ran. My inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors, some congratulating me, others asking for copies of my evidence, and more than a few asking how they could legally challenge their bills too. What had started as a personal battle was quickly evolving into something much bigger. The power outage had become a catalyst for community awareness. People who used to ignore HOA meetings or toss the newsletter in the trash were now organizing group calls, comparing bills, and digging through old documents. One neighbor even found out the HOA had been charging him for a storage unit that didn't exist anymore. The pressure kept mounting. The board tried to hold an emergency meeting, but with no working facility and growing outrage, they had to host it in the park under a gazebo. Ironic, considering they used to scoff at any suggestion that wasn't by the book. That meeting was packed. I didn't even speak. I just sat near the back and watched them struggle to contain the backlash. Greg, the president, was visibly nervous. Gone was the smug expression and scripted tone. He looked like a man trying to hold a sinking ship together with duct tape. One resident after another got up and demanded answers. Why weren't we told about the billing changes? Who voted for them? Why was electricity being routed through private property? How many other corners had they cut? For a board used to empty meetings and rubber stamp approvals, it was a full-blown rebellion. The HOA attorney showed up halfway through, looking like he'd been dragged out of bed. He tried to defuse things by promising an independent audit, but the crowd wasn't buying it. I stayed quiet during that meeting, but people kept glancing at me. I wasn't just the guy who turned the power off anymore. I was the guy who pulled back the curtain and showed the whole show was rigged. And the more people learned, the angrier they became. Over the next week, a petition started circulating to remove the current board. It didn't come from me. It came from a neighbor, a woman who had lived here for 20 years and had never spoken up at a meeting before. She told me, "I always thought they were looking out for us, but now I feel like we've been paying them to take advantage of us." The petition gained over 100 signatures in 3 days, more than enough to force a vote. Meanwhile, the board was scrambling to repair the damage, literally and figuratively. They offered to adjust the billing model, started sending weekly updates, and even hired a PR firm to handle communications. But the residents had already seen behind the curtain. No amount of spin could erase what had happened, and no apology would fix years of silent exploitation. A few days after the emergency meeting, I got another visit, this time from 2 board members, neither of whom had ever spoken to me before. They were polite, careful, and obviously coached. They offered to negotiate terms for reconnecting the power, reimbursement for the overcharges, a signed agreement not to use the transformer again, and a promise to draft a new billing policy with community input. They even said Greg was considering stepping down for health reasons. I listened, nodded, and told them I'd consider it. The truth was, I already knew my answer. I wasn't just fighting for a refund anymore. I was fighting for accountability. They had built their entire system on the assumption that no one would ever push back hard enough, long enough, or smart enough. But now they had a community that wasn't afraid anymore. And they weren't just in the dark physically. They were exposed, vulnerable, and for the first time in years, being held to the fire by the very people they were supposed to serve. Residents started showing up at my house, not angry but grateful. One brought me a pie. Another handed me a copy of her bill and asked if I could help her understand the charges. A few teenagers even asked if they could interview me for a school project about local politics. The community had changed. There was a spark now, ironic considering the lack of electricity, and people were no longer willing to let 5 people in a boardroom control their lives without question.